Ao is born in a small coastal African village where the wind always sounds like it is carrying distant voices from the sea. His birth happens during a night when the ocean is unusually calm, so still that even the fishermen refuse to go out, saying the water feels like it is listening. When the baby is finally brought out, there is no cry, no movement at first, only a long, unsettling silence that makes the midwives exchange fearful glances. Then, suddenly, he breathes, slow, steady, unnatural calm for a newborn, and that moment alone makes one of the older women step backward and refuse to touch him again. His mother holds him tightly, but her joy is mixed with fear she cannot explain, as if something invisible has already attached itself to the child. That night, 3 elders who came to witness the birth leave the house without speaking a single word, and none of them return again. As Ao grows, the village does not treat him like other children. He is not openly rejected at first, but people begin to create distance that slowly becomes permanent. When he crawls near gatherings, conversations drop slightly, and when he learns to walk, adults unconsciously shift away as if making space for something uncertain. Nothing bad is ever directly blamed on him, but small incidents always seem to gather around his presence: broken pots, sudden animal panic, slipping tools. Ao notices this long before he understands it, and the confusion begins shaping his silence even as a child. He starts playing alone not because he prefers it, but because no one ever stays long enough to play with him. By the time Ao is old enough to understand speech clearly, he begins noticing something disturbing about survival around him. A goat once falls from a steep slope where he is standing and should have been crushed, yet the animal lands beside him and dies instead of touching him. People who witness it do not accuse him, but they stop speaking about it entirely, as if ignoring it will make it less real. Ao does not feel powerful or protected. He feels like something is deciding outcomes without asking him. That thought follows him everywhere, even into sleep, where dreams feel shallow and incomplete. His mother becomes quieter as the years pass, not because she stops loving him, but because every conversation about him feels like walking into uncertainty. She avoids discussing his birth, and when neighbors ask questions, she responds with short sentences that end quickly. Ao begins to understand that even his mother does not fully know how to explain him. One evening, he asks her directly why people look at him differently, and she only holds his hands tightly without answering. That silence becomes louder than any explanation could have been. During a storm season, the village is hit by strong winds that destroy parts of homes and scatter livestock across the fields. Ao is sent to help secure supplies, and while running through collapsing structures, a heavy wooden beam falls where he is supposed to be standing. People nearby scream, expecting the worst, but when the dust clears, he is standing a few steps away, unharmed, staring at the exact place the beam should have struck him. The silence that follows is heavier than the storm itself. After that day, adults stop assigning him tasks during danger situations altogether. As Ao grows older, avoidance becomes more structured. It is no longer just instinctive distance, it becomes behavior. If he sits near a group, the group slowly rearranges itself. If he enters a conversation, it ends earlier than intended. Even when nothing unusual happens, people begin to associate his presence with uncertainty. Ao stops trying to interpret it as coincidence. Instead, he begins to study it quietly, observing how reality seems to adjust itself around him in subtle ways. Ao attempts once to test whether the fear around him is real or imagined. During a normal day, he deliberately stays near areas where danger might naturally occur: construction sites, riverbanks, unstable paths. Each time, something changes at the last moment. Tools drop beside him instead of on him, people shift him away unknowingly, animals avoid collisions at the final second. Nothing ever directly harms him, but everything around him seems to behave differently when he is present. He begins to understand that it is not protection, it is avoidance from something larger than him. The villagers begin forming unspoken rules around him. Children are told indirectly not to stay too close. Adults avoid sending him on risky errands. Even greetings become shorter, as if too much interaction might create consequences. Ao feels this shift deeply because it is not hatred, it is fear mixed with confusion. He is still part of the village physically, but emotionally he is slowly being removed from it without anyone openly saying so. Ao starts walking longer distances away from the village just to feel normal air around him. In distant areas, people do not immediately recognize him, but strange patterns still repeat. Accidents pause when he approaches, conversations weaken, and attention fades unnaturally. It feels as if his presence triggers uncertainty in any environment, not just his home. This realization makes him feel less like a person and more like a condition people react to without understanding. One evening, Ao sits alone near the coastline watching the sea behave with perfect stillness. For the first time, he wonders if the ocean understands him better than people do, because it does not react with fear or confusion. Yet even there, he feels the same invisible distance, as if the world itself acknowledges him but refuses to explain why. He does not cry or speak. He simply sits with the growing realization that his life is not unfolding like others, but orbiting something no one has named. Ao begins to travel farther away from his village, not because he is escaping physically, but because staying in one place makes the silence around him feel heavier and more intentional. Each journey takes him through different settlements where people do not know his past, yet still react to him in the same quiet, uneasy way. Even when nothing happens, people subtly reposition themselves when he enters a space, as if their bodies respond before their thoughts do. Ao starts noticing that this reaction is not learned from stories alone. It appears instinctive, like something deeper than rumor. This realization makes him question whether the world itself has developed a response to him that no one consciously controls. One afternoon, Ao encounters a traveling trader resting under a large tree beside the road. Unlike others, the trader does not immediately step away or show fear, which makes Ao pause longer than usual. The man shares water and dried food without asking questions, treating him with a normalcy that feels unfamiliar and almost uncomfortable. For a short time, Ao forgets the weight of interpretation and simply exists as a boy eating beside another human being. But when the trader prepares to leave, he hesitates briefly, as if choosing silence over curiosity, and then walks away faster than necessary. Ao is left wondering if even kindness cannot survive prolonged proximity to him. Ao returns to the coastline where he grew up, hoping that the sea might provide something the land never offered, consistency without fear. The ocean is vast and loud, yet strangely calming compared to human behavior. As he stands near the waves, fishermen watch him from a distance, but continue working without acknowledging him directly. It is not hostility that he feels, but careful avoidance, as if even speaking about him might disrupt balance. The wind moves strongly, but around him the air feels slightly stiller, reinforcing the idea that his presence alters attention itself. Ao seeks out the old midwife who assisted at his birth, hoping that someone who witnessed his beginning might explain what others refuse to say. The woman is older now, her movements slower, but her reaction to seeing him remains tense in a quiet, controlled way. She does not deny his birth, but she avoids describing it fully, choosing instead to speak in fragments that feel intentionally incomplete. She mentions silence in the room that night, not as absence of sound, but as something that made everyone uncomfortable enough to leave early. Ao realizes she is not hiding truth because it is dangerous, but because it is unexplainable in a way people prefer not to confront. Leaving the midwife, Ao walks through familiar paths that now feel emotionally unfamiliar, as if memory itself has shifted its meaning. He reflects on how his life has never been defined by single events, but by how people continuously adjust their behavior around him. Even kindness feels unstable because it often contains hesitation beneath it. He begins to understand that his isolation is not caused by one moment of rejection, but by a long accumulation of micro-responses that never stop repeating. This realization weighs more heavily than any physical hardship he has experienced. Over time, Ao notices that danger behaves differently when he is present, not in a magical sense, but in patterns that disturb logic. Situations that should result in harm shift slightly at the last moment, redirecting outcomes in ways no one can predict. People begin to whisper labels about him, not out of certainty, but out of discomfort with uncertainty itself. Ao does not accept these labels, but he also cannot deny the repeated patterns he experiences. He starts recording these moments mentally, not as proof of power, but as documentation of confusion. Ao gradually stops participating in communal activities because even neutral presence seems to disturb group behavior. He notices conversations shorten when he sits nearby, and laughter becomes less natural, as if awareness of him interrupts flow. Rather than confronting it, he withdraws quietly, choosing distance over explanation. This withdrawal is not emotional surrender, but a practical adaptation to repeated patterns he cannot change. Still, each step away from people feels like another layer of invisibility forming around him while he remains physically seen. Ao visits his mother again, hoping for something stable in a life that feels increasingly uncertain. She looks older, not just in age, but in emotional exhaustion, as if years of unspoken fear have shaped her expression. She asks him to stay longer this time, but her voice carries tension that suggests she is asking for relief more than presence. Ao understands that staying might bring her emotional comfort, but also continued anxiety from others. He leaves quietly, realizing love and fear can exist side by side without canceling each other. Ao begins writing detailed accounts of his daily experiences, not to be understood by others, but to preserve his own sense of continuity. The writing becomes a form of grounding, allowing him to organize events that otherwise feel disconnected. He writes about how people react before events happen, how silence changes when he enters spaces, and how survival feels less like victory and more like unresolved pattern. Over time, these writings accumulate into a personal archive of confusion rather than clarity. Rumors about Ao continue to spread even in places he has never visited, carried by travelers who exaggerate fragments of his story. He hears descriptions of himself that feel detached from reality, as if multiple versions of him exist in people's minds. This distortion frustrates him, but he begins to accept that truth and perception no longer travel together. Ao realizes that his life is no longer defined by what happens to him, but by how others interpret what happens around him. This separation between identity and reality becomes one of his deepest burdens. Ao leaves the coastline and walks for many days until he reaches a village that has never heard his name. For the first time in years, nobody stares at him strangely when he enters the market. A woman sells him roasted corn and even smiles at him, and the simple kindness almost makes him forget the heavy life he has carried for so long. He rents a small mud hut and decides to remain there for a while, hoping that perhaps he can finally live like an ordinary young man. But as the days pass, he notices something familiar beginning again. Whenever he enters crowded places, conversations slowly become quieter. When he sits beside people, they suddenly remember other things they need to do and walk away. No one can explain why, and neither can he. The same invisible distance that followed him from childhood has somehow arrived before his story did. One evening, While sitting outside his hut, Ao hears loud crying from a nearby house. An elderly man has suddenly passed away in his sleep, and the entire village gathers to comfort the family. Ao wishes to help, so he quietly joins the mourners and sits near the doorway. The moment some people notice him, an uneasy silence spreads through the crowd. Nobody says anything rude, but several people begin whispering to one another. By the next morning, rumors are already moving through the village that the strange newcomer appeared on the same night the old man died. Ao hears the whispers while walking through the market and feels his heart grow heavy. He has done nothing wrong, yet once again sorrow has somehow attached itself to his presence. Over the next few weeks, more unfortunate events happen around the village. A fishing boat sinks during a storm, a farmer loses his harvest to heavy rain, and several animals disappear into the forest. None of these events have anything to do with Ao, but people slowly begin looking at him differently. Their eyes no longer carry curiosity but caution. Mothers call their children indoors when he walks by, and old men stop their conversations whenever he approaches. Ao feels the familiar loneliness returning, even though he tried so hard to escape it. He realizes that no matter where he goes, he never stays an ordinary person for long. Somehow, people eventually begin to connect him to things he cannot control. Unable to bear the growing suspicion, Ao decides to leave before the fear around him becomes hatred. He packs his few belongings into a small cloth bag and starts walking before sunrise. As he leaves the village, he turns around one last time and sees smoke rising from cooking fires and hears roosters crowing in the distance. It looks peaceful, and for a brief moment he wishes he could have remained there forever. But deep inside, he knows the pattern would only continue. He feels like a man carrying a shadow that enters every place before he does, slowly changing how people see him. With a heavy heart, he continues down the empty road, once again alone with only the sound of his footsteps for company. That night, Ao sleeps beneath a giant tree beside the road. He dreams of his father again, clearer than before. In the dream, his father is standing on a distant hill, looking at him with sadness. Ao tries to run toward him, but the distance never becomes shorter no matter how fast he moves. Then his father finally speaks for the first time, saying only 4 words, "You must keep walking, son." Before Ao can ask what they mean, he wakes suddenly in the darkness. The moon is high above him, and the night is completely silent. He sits beneath the tree until dawn, repeating those words over and over in his mind, wondering why a father he barely remembers would tell him to keep walking instead of telling him to come home. The next morning, Ao wakes before sunrise and remains seated beneath the giant tree long after the birds begin singing. He cannot stop thinking about the dream and the strange words his father spoke. The sentence is short, yet it feels heavy, as if it carries an answer hidden somewhere inside it. He wonders if his father left because he was afraid, or because he knew something about him that nobody else understood. For the first time in many years, Ao feels angry instead of lonely. He has spent his entire life carrying questions that no one is willing to answer, and now even his dreams speak in riddles. When the sun finally rises, he stands slowly and continues walking, but every step feels different, as if he is moving towards something he cannot yet see. Several days later, Ao arrives at a riverside settlement where fishermen are repairing their nets. The people there seem friendly, and one old fisherman offers him food and a place to rest. For the first time in a long while, Ao spends an evening sitting with others around a fire, listening to stories about the river and the changing seasons. He says very little about himself, because he has learned that people often become afraid once they know too much. As the fire burns lower, he watches the faces around him and feels something he has almost forgotten, belonging. But deep inside, another feeling rises beside it, a quiet fear that this peace will not last. Every place that has ever welcomed him has eventually changed. The following morning, the fishermen invite Ao to join them near the riverbank. While they work, one of the men suddenly slips from a wet rock and falls into the rushing water. The others immediately pull him out, and thankfully he is unharmed, but someone notices that Ao had been standing nearby when it happened. It is a small observation, almost meaningless, yet Ao has seen this pattern too many times before. By evening, whispers have already begun. Some people glance at him with uncertainty, while others speak in hushed voices whenever he walks past. He does not wait for the rumors to grow stronger. He already knows where this road leads. That night, Ao sits alone beside the river and stares at the moon reflected on the dark water. He feels exhausted, not in his body but in his heart. He has spent years moving from place to place, hoping to find one village where he can simply exist without becoming a mystery. Instead, every new beginning slowly turns into the same story. He wonders if there is something about him that people sense before they even understand it. The thought frightens him because it means he may never truly belong anywhere. For the first time in many years, tears fill his eyes. He does not cry loudly. He simply sits in silence while the river moves steadily beside him, carrying its waters to places he will probably never see. Before dawn arrives, Ao leaves the riverside settlement without saying goodbye to anyone. He walks along a narrow path through tall grass while the morning mist covers the land like a pale blanket. As he walks, he realizes something painful. He is no longer searching for answers about why he never dies. Instead, he is searching for a place where people will not fear him because of it. Yet with every village he leaves behind, that hope grows smaller. The words from his dream return to him once again. "You must keep walking, son." For the first time, he wonders if those words were not advice but a warning. He stops in the middle of the empty path and looks toward the horizon, suddenly afraid that his journey may never truly end. By midday, the sun becomes so hot that Ao stops beneath an enormous baobab tree to rest. As he sits there, he notices an old woman slowly approaching with a basket balanced on her head. Unlike most people, she does not look at him with fear or curiosity. She simply sits beside him and begins eating roasted groundnuts. For a long time, neither of them speaks. Then the woman suddenly says that she has seen his face before, not in person but in stories told by travelers many years ago. Ao's heart begins to beat faster because the woman looks older than his mother, perhaps old enough to know something important. He asks her what the stories said, and she replies that people often spoke of a young man who never seemed to change, a boy who appeared in different villages over the years but always looked exactly the same. The words strike Ao like cold rain because he has never considered how long people may have been noticing him. The old woman studies his face carefully before asking him a strange question. She wants to know his age. Ao gives his answer without thinking, but she slowly shakes her head and says that the stories she heard about him were already old when she was a young girl. At first, he believes she must be mistaken. How could anyone have spoken about him before he was even born? Yet the woman insists that she remembers hearing about a quiet young traveler who never seemed to age and who always left villages after people became afraid of him. Ao feels the ground beneath him becoming unsteady. For the first time, he wonders whether his memories are complete. What if there are years of his life he cannot remember? What if his story began much earlier than he thinks? That evening, Ao cannot sleep. He sits beside a small fire, staring into the glowing coals while the old woman's words repeat inside his mind. He begins remembering small things that never seemed important before. He remembers meeting old people who looked familiar, even though he had never seen them. He remembers places that somehow felt known to him from the moment he arrived. He remembers moments when someone stared at him too long, as if trying to recognize him. Suddenly, these memories no longer seem ordinary. They feel like pieces of a puzzle he never realized he was carrying. Fear slowly fills his chest because the mystery of never dying is terrible enough, but the thought of forgotten years is even worse. A man can survive loneliness, but how does he survive not knowing his own life? Before sunrise, Ao begins walking again. He does not know where he is going, but for the first time in many years, he feels driven by something stronger than loneliness. He wants answers. Every step seems heavier because he is no longer just wondering why people fear him. Now he is wondering whether he even knows himself at all. Along the road, he passes abandoned huts, dry fields, and silent streams, but his mind remains trapped inside one terrifying thought. What if he has already lived far longer than he remembers? The possibility frightens him so deeply that he almost stops walking. Yet he remembers the words from his dream once again. "You must keep walking, son." So he keeps going, even though he is beginning to fear what waits at the end of the road. As the sun begins to set, Ao reaches a small abandoned hut standing alone near a field of tall grass. The roof is partly broken, and the walls are worn by time. He enters only to rest for the night, but inside he notices something strange carved into one of the wooden beams. It is not a symbol or a drawing. It is a name, his own name, Ao. He freezes completely. The carving looks very old, far older than it should be, and beside it are several marks scratched into the wood, as though someone had been counting the passing years. His hands begin to tremble. He slowly touches the letters and feels an unbearable sadness rising inside him. Had he been here before? Did he carve this himself? If so, why can't he remember it? As darkness fills the hut, Ao realizes something terrifying. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not why he never dies, but how much of his life has already been forgotten.